My name's Bernie, K2YO. We're here tonight to talk about DMR. Our odyssey is with DMR as a club began back last May. That we held a public vote. It actually began in March and April when the board said that they wanted to set a direction that Limarc needs to become a leader in DMR on Long Island. As Joe has said, we are one of the largest clubs in America. Second, the only one larger than us is DARA, and as he said, there's some problems in how they count. So the board said yes, that DMR was a good direction that the club needs to pursue. In the May meeting, we put it up to vote because we needed funding, we had money. And so the club resoundingly, about 98% voted in favor of let's move ahead with DMR. We were able to make some contacts in Dayton. We picked up a repeater at a very good price, and we have not looked back. So tonight we're going to talk about a lot of how it works, less on how to actually use it. We'll get into that a little bit, but you'll leave here with an understanding of how it works, which is important as a ham radio operator. You need to know how things work, not just that it works, but how, and also where to go to get the resources that you may need to help you actually be on the air, the protocols, the code plugs, et cetera, et cetera. These numbers, the size of amateur radio and DMR, if anybody saw my presentation at the Hamfest, it said there were 14,000 registered devices. Those numbers were in the presentation that I got. This presentation was originally used at Dayton by the DMR Mark guys. I emailed them after the Hamfest, and these are the latest numbers. So there have been over 10,000 registered DMR users since May of this year. Just to give you a sense of the type of meteoric rise that we're seeing in this service. Is it a flash in the pan? I don't know, but it's sure a very big flash, whatever it is.
Why do you have to register your radio?
We'll get into that in a bit, but that's just how DMR works. A DMR radio has to have a unique identifier in it, and while you and I are unlikely to pick a random number that's the same, it is possible. Now, have 25,000 of us pick a random number, and the odds are somebody's probably going to come up with overlapping numbers. So by registering them, you get a unique number. Those unique numbers are free. It doesn't cost anything. There's the DMR Mark is the group that has decided or has become the de facto standard in providing those. There are two different types of DMR networks. There are Motorola's and there are Hyteras. We are a Motorola network. We are a Motorola network because about 90% of the rest of the amateur worldwide DMR networks are Motorola's. Hyteras do not have the ability to link between repeaters the way that the Motorola's do. So if I'm on a Hytera system, I can't key up and speak to somebody in Los Angeles. This is the reason why we're going with Motorola. Motorola developed that software. They are not sharing it, meaning they consider it proprietary to their systems. So Hytera doesn't have that connection ability. When we start talking about who are the people, the major players, DMR Mark, as I said, are the people that provide the IDs. DMR Mark is actually DMR, which is Digital Mobile Radio, Motorola Amateur Radio Club. So those guys are Motorola hams. They are the RF guys that made this system, the guys that are working on it, that are selling it, et cetera, but they're also hams. And so that is the driving force today. They are also considered the de facto issuer of IDs. Somebody had to be, everybody got together. It's probable that these guys weren't at that meeting, and that's why they became the de facto standard. So, but somebody has to issue the IDs. A couple of other people, the turbo.org is a great resource to go and look at things. And by the way, I'm not offended if anybody wants notes. Number one, I'll send you this presentation. Just email me and say you want it. Or if there's a slide too complex to make notes on, get your camera out. I'm not offended by any of those choices. DMR North America, good. There are some regional groups. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I want to keep moving because some of you guys have to get up at, say, tomorrow sometime. Okay, let's talk about what is a DMR network. At the basic level, we have repeaters. We meaning Limarc, have a repeater. It lives in plain view. That is our DMR repeater. So let's say it could be number 3 here. Every repeater is connected to an access bridge. That access bridge is, in slang terms, is called a C bridge. There are 2 different companies that sell the software. It's all written by Ravenet. This is the C bridge that allows you to get beyond your local repeater. So let's say that I'm here on Long Island and I want to talk to somebody over here in Los Angeles. To be able to do that, I have to go through an access bridge. I may be able to get from bridge to bridge, or I may have to go up to one of the authoritative sources. Those of you that are IT guys see that this does look similar to how DNS works. That there are authoritative sources, there are secondary sources, tertiary sources, etc. on down. Ultimately, if you have to, backbone-wise, you go all the way up to the top. We will just touch on it briefly, but some of our groups are authoritative sources, top level, meaning North America group, North America English speaking, North American Spanish speaking. Those are all authoritative groups issued by DMR Mark. So at some point, some of our talk groups are really hosted by the big people on top. Some of our talk groups are hosted by just us here, and nobody else knows about them. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Everything down here on the repeater level is RF. Everything above that is IP. So the repeater talking to the access bridges, those are IP connections. Access bridges talking to other bridges, talking to other authoritative sources, those are all IP connections. So literally this is out on the public network. Some of it's private network stuff. Majority of it is just regular stand-up connections. Any questions? Okay, what is DMR? DMR is digital mobile radio. It is a European standard. I'm not going to say it's a European standard as in they forced it on us. There were a number of different agencies that worked on it. The Europeans took the lead and implemented it first, and that's why it's considered a European standard.
They actually implemented the specification before it went out into the ETSI does a lot of stuff besides just mobile radio. The broadcast standard, they also deal with satellite standards, so they're a very strong organization. Actually has a bunch of engineers that develop different standards.
Yep.
Could you repeat that thing, Barry? I couldn't hear.
Eric was saying that what's the initials? ETS?
ETS.
Right up there.
Oh, those. The
That's
ETS.
people.
The ETSI is a standards agency that gets involved in a lot of things, not just RF like we deal with it. They get involved in broadcast standards, television standards, et cetera, et cetera. So they were the first people to actually implement DMR before it became popularized here in the US. DMR is divided into 3 different tiers. We only care about one of those. I'm going to touch on them just briefly. Tier 1 is a single channel configuration. It was one of the first ones that they used, hence why it was number 1. We do not use Tier 1. In amateur radio, do not get a Tier 1 only radio. Tier 2 is what we use. These are some of the technical parameters of it. We'll get into it in a minute. You'll hear this term IP Site Connect, IPSC, that is used very commonly. That is those data connections, those IP connections between repeaters and C bridges and other C bridges. So those are literally, if you were to look at them, they're just a packet stream it's a TCP packet stream. Now, Tier 3. Tier 3 gets into the trunking world. We as amateurs do not have any type of implementation involving trunking. So if you're looking at used radio equipment, it must be Tier 2 equipment. Tier 3 equipment will not help you. Even though you have a trunking radio, you will be very alone because it won't work on amateur DMR networks. The vocoder. Currently it's a DSVI MB2. According to the people, they're saying that it's the same as a D-Star, but sounds a little better. I'm not going to get into the aesthetics of it, but this is the magic of how it works. This is the D-to-A chip, basically, that's inside of it that makes it work.
By the way, it's also used in the fusion radios.
This chip is also, Eric was saying, this chip is also used in the fusion system, which is Jesu's operation. So basically, we have 3 different amateur offerings, 3 and a kind of 4th. The big boys are D-Star. Jesu has Fusion. D-Star is ICOM. Jesu is Fusion. There's DMR, which is not really, the big manufacturers, none of them particularly support it. And there's a little bit of P25. But those are right now what's out there. So DMR is what we're talking about tonight. We as Limarc have a Fusion repeater also. So anybody that's interested in experimenting with the fusion radios, absolutely. We have a wonderful fusion system that was provided to us by Yaesu, and it's available for use. Okay, the two slots in my radio, between my radio and the other end, whatever the other end. Let's see, the other end is Harry with just another radio. I have actually two, I don't want to say channels. I have 2 time slots that are going out of this radio. Those 2 time slots are at 12.5 kilohertz at 6.25 kilohertz each. Those are fairly narrow. If you were to put voice on that, you will notice that those are very narrow. In fact, we are used to 25 kilohertz spacing on our radios today. We're going half of that, and we're putting twice as much information on them. Now, when this stream goes out, this radio basically takes analog in. There's a speaker here. There's a microphone here. When I speak into the radio, a stream of data is going out. That stream of data is basically interleaved, channel or time slot 1, time slot 2, time slot 1, time slot 2, etc. Those are there whether you need them or not. And if the second time slot is not being used, they're still there. They're just spaced out, and it goes as zeros instead of valid data. Some of the details on it. It's 12.5 bandwidth. We're using TDMA so that it's 2 time slots, it's time division multiplexed. Basically, one of the big advantages of using DMR is, compared to analog, it uses 25% of the space, so that we can pack a lot more in. Each channel can carry voice or data. The ham implementation today is voice. You conceptually could take one of those time slots and pump data over it, so that as you're talking, there'd be a data channel going along beside you. It's not hugely fast data, but it's data and it's moving. This may be something that we'll see progress in the future, say in an Aries application, where you've got somebody at a far-flung checkpoint and they're streaming images back along with their data that's going back. Where this actually works, remember that these radios are designed for businesses. So let's say we have a police car. A police car has an officer talking on the radio, and he's got a mobile data terminal right there taking whatever the details was of the call he just got. That's one time slot for the radio, 1 time slot for the data terminal. And so that's really where this stuff starts coming. Your UPS guy, anybody that's gotten a UPS package lately, he's running a small data center inside that truck. It's actually pretty astounding to see what they can do there. I got a package today. I got an email saying that there was a package sitting on my front porch moments after they said they delivered it. It's really kind of astounding what they can do nowadays. Time slots are called time slot 1, time slot 2. That will be important. We'll talk about it later. Basically everything we've talked about. There is some limited texting. Typically 1 time slot, usually time slot 1, is used for the network stuff. Time slot 2 is used for the local stuff. You'll see this as you're programming your radio, that we use 1 time slot to gather all of our local channels, meaning all 1 of them. And then on the other one, you've got a whole bunch of talk groups, and those are all of the ones that are outside in the network. This is set up that way so that we as Limarc can do anything we want on our time slot. We could connect up to our analog repeaters. We could do anything. They don't care. As long as once we start messing with time slot 1, now we're bothering everybody else out there. And we'll talk about that in a minute. You have to be cognizant of the fact that my little radio here can key up every repeater in the United States. All 1,600 of them. I can make them all go kerchunk at one time. So I can upset many, many more people. So we do need to be aware of that. Dave, I saw you laugh. Various details of the TDMA, I'm not going to get into it too much, but this is basically how the spacing and the framing works for sending the data out. The actual frame, the amount of payload in it, the the various details of it. Basically, this is a fairly generic TDMA scheme. There's nothing really exotic here. There's nothing bleeding edge here. This is how TDMA data has been used for quite a while now. Various things, various terminology, talk groups, zones, color codes, code plugs, scanning, roaming, simplex, admit criteria. We're going to talk about each one of these. These are various things that are important for how does the system work and that you need to be aware of as you're actually setting up your radio. A talk group. A talk group basically is a figment of software. It's a number. Talk groups ultimately come down to an integer, a 4-digit integer usually, and it defines who we want to talk to. What's the talk group for Limarc Local? 7388. So 7388 is called Limarc Local. Why is it 7388 and not 7389 or 7? Because it just is. So 7388 is Limarc Local. That means that if I key up on talk group 7388, I want to talk to somebody else who is interested in Limarc Local. Let's say that I use talk group, the talk group for North America. That means that when I key up, I'm not saying I don't want to talk to somebody on Long Island, but I want to talk to somebody who has the intent to talk to somebody in North America as a whole. Some of these become very specific when you say there is a North America English group and there's a North America Spanish group. So if I key up on North America Spanish and the guy doesn't know how to speak English, it's really not my fault. It's my fault. It's not his fault that he's keyed up on a Spanish-speaking group. And so this allows like-minded people to get into like-minded things. We're looking at, from an Aries standpoint, what kind of talk groups would you need to be able to say that maybe all of those people need to talk to each other and all of these people need to talk to each other. Now keep in mind, you're sharing the same time slots. So we're not magically expanding the system, but what we are saying is that when I key up my radio, I can target who it is that I want to hear my transmission. That's what you do with a talk group. Oh, talk groups also are administered down from the C bridge. So if Neil comes to me and says, I want to have a talk group 1, 2, 3, 4, great. I'll call the C bridge administrators and see if we can get you a talk group 1, 2, 3, 4. Right now, Limarc does not own a C bridge. Right now, we use the services of another gentleman named Bernie, who I refer to as Bernie Squared. He's Bernie Prime, I'm Bernie Squared. I refer to him as Bernie Prime, that he's the original Bernie. They are the leaders of the Bronx Turbo Group. And so right now, they're being gracious enough to give us space on their machines so that we're using their C bridges for our repeater. At some point, and we approved the budget to do it. Right now, we're waiting for the club to grow to really justify the expense. The C bridge will probably be about $3,000 to add to the system. So at some point, we as a club will grow enough that we'll need to have a C bridge. Zones. Zones are a way that you can group together a number of talk groups or channels. Let's say that I live here and I also have a house in South Carolina. South Carolina has a big DMR system, so when I go down there, I want to be able to have all my South Carolina friends in here. I also want to be able to have all my Limarc channels in here. I can group them into zones so that when I land in South Carolina, I just go to the zone South Carolina. I don't have to sort through looking for my talk group through all of my New York stuff. So zones are a way that you can group stuff together. Anybody programming their first radio plug, do not consider zones. Use one zone, put everybody in that one zone, please. You'll just make yourself confused. Zones are great when you start talking about ways of categorizing channels together. Color codes. Color codes are the DMR way of saying PL tones, or the same way of saying whatever Motorola called those CTC, whatever the Motorola version of PL tones were. This is basically a subaudible, you can't hear. It's digital, so you're not really going to be listening anyway. But it is the tone that goes with your transmission that in tight RF environments like we have here in New York, it's the ability to key that repeater and have that repeater that's on the same frequency know that I'm not talking to it. Code plugs. We said that these radios are made for businesses first. This is what DMR was meant to, and we're basically retasking them. The beauty of our license as a ham, people say, well, is your radio type approved? My answer is, I don't care. Because the FCC says that if I can get this mouse on the air and tune it up without providing spurious emissions, I can transmit through my mouse. I can transmit through anything. So I can take this radio, even though it was meant for the business classes, it has certain part approvals for those business classes. I don't care. I can use it. Now, unfortunately, I have the features that came because of that business class. So I can't front panel program this radio. There's companies working on making front panel programmable radios, but in the business world, you cannot have a front panel programmable radio. That's also very difficult to say. So I can't put a, say that 10 times, I can't.
It's against the law anyway, so it's required. The FCC said you can't
Yes.
make this programmable.
No, that's the point. That businesses cannot have front panel programmable radios. So we as amateurs are kind of stuck with that. There are companies that are starting to target amateurs and making radios, looking at putting programming into them that they could be front panel programmed. Ultimately, I've got to get a plug into here, a radio plug. The programming here is called a plug. Similarly, if I were to pull a thing out of here and hold it up and say, there's all my programming. Well, it's ones and zeros, so you can't really see it, but that's literally what it is this thing that has all the configuration parameters of my radio. I stick it in my radio, and my radio now has understanding as to what it's supposed to do. That's called a plug. When you program these radios, you download the software out of it, meaning the plug out of it. When you get done modifying it, you upload the plug back into it. So when somebody calls and says, Bernie, I don't know how to program my radio, I say, why don't you ask around and get somebody to give you a plug that'll get you started. What I'm saying is you want that little file. In the computer world, they look like files that will then get you up and on the air. Any questions? Scanning. Scanning is an interesting, DMR is not near as populated as, say, our 8.5 machine or our 440 machine. And so a lot of people will just put their radio on scan and be ripping through a whole bunch of channels. One of the things that you do need to be aware of, though, is let's say you're listening to all this stuff going by, and I hear somebody say, hey, I'm out in sunny California, and I want to talk to him. If my radio's I'm going to be 3 channels past that by the time I pick the radio up. And in a minute, we'll talk about some operational things that you need to do to help prevent that. But scanning gives you an easy way to be ripping through your radio, finding out who's talking, what's going on, where can I find some conversations. Roaming. Roaming is a very different concept. DMR has the ability built in to be talking to this repeater, moving in this direction, I get out of range there, or I'm in suboptimal range for that repeater, but I'm now in range of this repeater over here. And my radio can make that decision. The same way that your cell phone jumps from tower to tower, my radio can jump from that transmitter to that transmitter. You, as the operator, will not particularly realize that you just moved. The same way that when you're driving down the highway in your car, you don't realize that your cell phone just switched from this tower to that tower to that tower to that tower. This is that similar concept that is built into DMR.
Like the voting system.
Exactly. It is very much like the voting system. We don't have any environments dense enough here in Long Island yet to where roaming would really be usable.
It's actually not allowed in the entire system. They recommend that it be shut off.
Okay. Eric says that they don't like it. I'm showing you the slides from the DMR Mark people, and they talk about it. At this point, we're not going to see roaming for a long time. Long time meaning a couple of years at least. Keep in mind, when we talk about time frames in DMR, we just had it doubled in size in the last 6 months. So when I say we're not going to see that for quite a while, who knows what that really means in actual time.
Next week.
Yeah. Roaming and beaconing, I don't want to slow down with that. Simplex. DMR offers a ability that we as hams consider to be bad, rude, wrong, not to be done. On a DMR radio, most all of them support something called talk around. What talk around does is instead of transmitting on the input to the repeater, I transmit on the output of the repeater. And that was put in place because then we could go simplex. Neil and I can talk directly in simplex. Problem is that all the rest of you guys that are sitting in range of us are hearing us also, and you're confused because when you call us on the repeater, we're not hearing you. And so it's as hams, we know that it's bad. You don't want to be talking on the output of the repeater. If you talk on the output of 850, I will eventually find you, and I will not be happy with you. Trust me. So DMR offers that ability of talk around. I highly recommend you turn it off if you can in your radio. Some of us, and I won't mention any names because they don't want to be embarrassed by it, but their radio got stuck in talk around and they couldn't figure out why. They couldn't talk to people. And so if your radio supports it, just turn talk around off. Simplex, this is a much better solution. This is a more ham-related solution. There are certain frequencies that are considered to be simplex frequencies. Now, I can either connect to a frequency in a talk group, or I could just connect to a different frequency. So if a bunch of us are out doing an event, we could say that, okay, the following frequencies, and they've defined nationwide which ones are the desirable ones. These are much like the, what is it, 14652 is the 2 meter call frequency? This is the same concept. And so this works out much better that you have a separate channel in here that is now simplex versus trying to talk around on the outside.
Can you use any channel simplex?
Okay, can you? Yes. Should you? No. You generally want to stick with these. You can physically do it, but you may have repeaters coming over the top of you. That there is a band plan for DMR. And the frequency coordinating agencies are taking DMR into account because we can be very annoying to analog repeaters. And so they're trying to space the DMRs together so they can just annoy each other because they don't get near as annoyed with each other. Admit criteria. In our current analog world, I key my mic up. My radio doesn't care if somebody's on the frequency, not on the frequency. It's going to start spitting out stuff. In the digital world, I can't monitor, per se, and see if somebody's there. Because the talk group may be in use, but it may be one that I don't have access to. So I don't really have an easy way of saying, is time slot 1, which I'm about to transmit on, truly available? And so DMR has come up with a different way of doing that. From a programming standpoint, it's recommended that you use something called color code free. What that means is when you key up your radio to transmit, it listens to see, is there anyone on the frequencies that you're using with the color code that you're using? And if there is not, meaning there is no color code matching the one that you're trying to use, then you're free to go. And so this now gives you some ability of knowing when I can key up. Now, just because I did key up and sent out some RF, it doesn't mean I can necessarily transmit. And that's something we'll get into later on, that if I turn, Dave, is yours charged? Except that your name's John.
Yeah, you're doing it again.
I do it all the time. When I key up, stop that, Neil. Hear that chirp sound? That chirp sound means that I've keyed up. I sent a short burst of data to the repeater that said, hi, this is Bernie looking like John. Can I transmit? And the repeater said, yes, the time slot's open, transmit away. Can somebody else somebody just key the...
Take the antenna off. Not you. Now you can't get in.
Okay, hear that tone instead? That means that my radio made
I heard it.
my radio made the round trip to the repeater, It got to the repeater, and the repeater said, no, you may not transmit. Now, why I can't transmit, it could be because somebody else is on the channel I need, it could be the IDs going by, or I could just be out of range. In this case, I'm most likely just out of range. And so that tone is your understanding as an operator that I'm not getting there. You get automatic feedback. There's no need to go, how's my signal? Because you know you just didn't make it. Okay, so to actually access a DMR repeater, you're going to need a combination of a frequency. That's pretty obvious. You need a color code. That's pretty obvious because I got to be able to key the repeater. But then I need a time slot and a talk group. My time slot and talk group must match, meaning that it's got to be a talk group on the time slot that I'm trying to use. I can try to go to 7388 Limarc local on time slot 1 as much as I want to try, and I will never get there because it's on time slot 2. So when you look at, later on there'll be a slide that will have all the talk groups and the time slots that are available through our system. Those two, just consider those are two pieces of data that go together. That it's this talk group and this talk group exists on this time slot, and you can wish all you want that it's on the other time slot, but it ain't going to be there. IPSC and bridges, I'm not going to get into that too much, but this is the ability when I key my radio as to what all else gets keyed out there. When I key up my local radio, I get permission to talk to my repeater, but then my repeater may have a back-end connection to a C bridge that goes off to a bunch of other things. And so literally, I can kerchunk my radio and key up all 1,600 repeaters in North America. People aren't necessarily going to like that. But, and this is one of the things operational we'll talk about in a few minutes about, what if I make a connection with some guy in Oregon and we're having a great conversation about how to make chocolate cake? Great conversation, but we don't need all 1,600 repeaters in North America keying up for that. So there are ways that you can deal with that to drop off those extra machines. Just verbiage stuff so that you'll know. See, the bridges, or C bridges, Ravenet is the actual developer. Ravenet systems are the people that actually wrote the code. It runs on a Linux machine. That is, shall we say, the master routers on the network. There's two different peoples that sell it. Bridgecom System sells them, and Rayfield Communications sells them. Rayfield calls it a C bridge. Bridgecom calls it a an MV DMR. Those are both. My opinion, I personally prefer Bridgecom because they go to Dayton. They really cater to the ham market. It's kind of like Fords and Chevys. There is no right or wrong. Radios, many sources for them. There are companies that make new radios targeting the ham market, mainly Connect Systems. Connect Systems does, TYT does. Connect Systems is actually out in California. You call our phone number, nice people answer, and they'll talk to you. TYT, a little less than that. There's a ton of Motorola stuff out there. There are actually Motorola dealers who are hams that will gladly sell you Motorola radios. Is Tim here? No. Tim, KB1, whatever, is he has a Motorola that he got from a guy we met down in Georgia. He's a ham who sells Motorola radios to businesses, and he gives very attractive pricing to hams, meaning as close as he can get it to his cost. Yes, sir, Neil.
Jerry at Connect Systems is actually selling TYT radios.
Yes.
So.
Neil was commenting that Connect Systems has now started selling the TYTs also. Connect System is probably the leader in ham-targeted DMR right now. To buy a radio, there is a new and used market. I have both. I have two brand new HCs that I bought. I have a used Motorola that I use in my car, and I've got a new Connect Systems mobile that I use in the house. So it works both ways. If you are buying in the used market, there is more risk there. You need to understand what you're doing, etc. Do keep in mind, there is DMR on UHF, VHF, and 900. We as Limarc only support UHF. If somebody would like to give us, say, $150,000 in grant money, we'll support them all. But right now, all we have is UHF. So make sure you get UHF radios. If you go onto eBay, you'll find a lot of VHF radios attractively priced. That's because most people do DMR on UHF. You are going to need programming software. As we said, these things are not front panel programmable, so I've got to be able to blow a code plug into this thing somehow. Connect Systems and TYT will give you the software for free. It comes with the radio. Motorola will give you the software in exchange for $300. So it's whichever way you want to do it. Yes, sir.
Just be careful when you look for some of these radios that are coming in from China, which is the TYT. There's another standard, which is a DMR, but it is not compatible with this.
Yes, that there is DMR. Remember, there's Tier 1, there's Tier 2, there's Tier 3. If they're trying to go after the commercial trunking market, those radios we cannot use.
Well,
So,
the other ones we're seeing are DPMR.
yeah. I would highly recommend get your radio from somebody you can talk to and call back, because at least your first one. After you've owned 2 or 3 DMR radios and you want to be a little experimentary, then yeah, go in the Hamfest, buy a radio, get a buddy to program it up. You can do those kind of things. But if you're starting out, get a radio from somebody you know, somebody you can contact. Programming cable, we said you had to have software, you've got to have the cable. Do not buy your first radio without the cable. You must have that cable. And don't say, well, gee, I've got a cable that kind of looks like it. That doesn't work these days. Looks like cables, look like cables, look like cables. There's stuff in the cables. The USB head on it has some intelligence in it. You got to have the right cable. Number of channels, most of them have just gotten obscenely big. I think the 750 HTs have 2,000 channels now. I have 3 friends, so I don't know what I would really need all those channels for. You know, your analog radio has thousands of channels. What does anybody ever do with those? And does anybody remember what's in them? Display or non-display, the advantage of a display on a DMR is when somebody keys up, if you know that ID, if that ID is in your list of contacts, it'll put up the name. So it'll say Neil versus 63912, or whatever his ID number is. So that's another reason why you want an ID number, is you can then publish them so that I can then know who it is that's actually calling me. DTMF keypad, not a lot of reason. I don't have a single DMR reason why you want a DTMF keypad. One advantage, though, is that these radios also do analog, and they're actually pretty good analog radios because the front end is very narrow, so you don't get a lot of intermod. Kevin and I are walking around the swap meet in Dayton last year. I'm carrying one of these things, and I'm doing just fine. Kevin's radios sounded like a cacophony of sounds because of the intermod. He had a regular a regular 440 radio, which has a very wide front end and gets all kinds of distortion. These things have fairly tight front ends, so they are pretty good as analog radios. Yes?
You can't add a contact through the keypad on the front.
Yes, Connect Systems is working their way into making these things front panel programmable. They're ham-only situations. The business people don't get that option. So the front panels the keypads are limited in their functionality. GPS, as a general concept, DMR amateurs do not want you running GPS over the network. If you have GPS in your radio, they ask you to turn it off. Bluetooth. I have not really seen any DMR radios with Bluetooth. I wish they would. How well does it work on that, Kevin?
Mint. I actually have a pair of sunglasses with Bluetooth built into it. I use them all the time.
Yeah, but you're not doing Bluetooth out of a radio.
Yep, I can program this through Bluetooth. I can connect this to my stereo in my truck.
Without Bluetooth?
Yep, this is a Bluetooth.
So Kevin says that his Motorola, which he basically hawked one of his children for, does do Bluetooth. Motorola makes wonderful radios. Just get your wallet out. Analog capable, as I said, all DMR radios that I have seen are analog compatible. I can at least tell you the TYTs, the Connect Systems, and the Motorola ones can all do analog also. And
There are a couple out there, Brent, that are digital only. I think like the 3500
Motorola's,
is only digital.
which goes back to, don't buy a Motorola unless you're buying it from somebody that is an amateur that can talk to you about what you're about to do. Mobile or portable. The only thing that I consider that we did wrong in implementing DMR as a club is that we told everybody to go out and get TYT radios for $180 or something like that. we should have had the fortitude to stand up and say, no, go out and get a Connexus mobile unit for $280. It's got a lot more power. One of the things one of the biggest challenges, guys buy their first radio, they're sitting in the kitchen of their 2-story house with all kinds of stuff piled upon them. They key up their radio and they go, why can't I get in? Well, the same reason that your analog radio won't get in. HTs just don't have the kind of power that you need. We are a mobile amateur radio club. So if you are a mobile user, get a mobile rig for your car. Yes, I can use a mag mount antenna and adapter on here, but it's going to hurt you. Get a mobile rig. Mobile rigs from Connect Systems, the CS800, I believe it's called, $280. So they're not that expensive these days. External amplifiers, okay. I'm going to say that there are no amplifiers that will work on DMR radios. There are no bricks that I can add on the end of this. Now, yes, there are some, but they cost thousands of dollars. So if you're going to take a $200 radio and put thousands of dollars worth of amplifier on it instead of just buying a mobile rig, good luck to you there. But right now there are no practical ones out there.
It's close, it's just not really.
I'm checking to see if I'm allowed to mention it. Our buddy Eric is working on designing a DMR brick. So when he gets there, he will be the only one that has such a thing. Various suppliers. Motorola, great solution, but it's pricey. Hytera are also business band stuff. Great radios, they are pricey. Now, we said that Hytera systems are not compatible with Motorola systems. That's repeaters. These are radios. Hytera radios will work on Motorola systems. Vertex standard. Vertex is what, Yaesu? That's the business band part of Yaesu. Good radios. Connect Systems, notice $1 sign. They are one of the most effective cost-wise. That they were the first people to really popularize DMR. When we decided in April, when the board voted to go DMR, everybody had Connect Systems radios because TYTs weren't even out yet. Baofeng supposedly has something. I've not actually seen one. A lot of people swore they would have them Monday when they get back to their shop. Haven't yet seen one of those. Tyteras, we've got a lot of the TYTs, great radios. They are handhelds. You're not going to get 1,000 watts out of a little small battery-powered thing. That was Tytera. Kenwood also. Kenwood supposedly has something. They have not brought it here yet.
Bernie?
Yes.
Zoom's coming out with one in 2016.
Cool.
Yeah, and by the way, Kenwood is the designer of the NX system, which all the police departments use. That's why they're not anxious to be in the
Sure. The ham market, we start to realize economically we don't have any clout at all. How many hams are there? I think there's about 120,000 in America. Let's say that half of them all bought a DMR radio. That's only 50,000 units. That's not a lot. And so that's not the kind of bulk that a manufacturer needs to see. Yes, sir.
Just on buying the radios, as you said, buy it from somebody you can talk to. I will tell you, I bought my TYT direct from China. Had a problem with it. I have a radio, works fine. Can't adjust the volume on it though. And there was no recourse. Fortunately, I bought it on eBay, and eBay's warranty policy kicked in. I have a TYT radio that I got a full rebate on because it didn't work, and because the postage was $40-something to send it
Sure.
back to China. So
Absolutely.
bear that in mind.
I have, if you're, there's no reason why if you're buying a TYT or a Connect Systems to not talk directly with Connect Systems in California. In fact, just a funny side story. I was at work. I called them up. I was working at a company called Kenimotive. I'll give them a free plug here. If you need any aerospace sensors and stuff, they're your people. Yeah. Anyway, I called. It caller ID'd and said Kenimotive. I didn't get Jerry. I got the other gentleman out there. And he answered my question, and then he said, "Excuse me, may I ask, but do you work for Kenimotive Systems on Central Avenue in Farmingdale?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "I used to work there 10 years ago." So I passed him off to the people that had been around for a while. And so they're real people. If you have a problem, they handle it in a real person kind of way. Now that they're selling TYTs, they offer their radios, which I'm a big fan of. They sell the TYT, which is the lower Chinese version. Well, these are Chinese also. It's the Chinese branded one, they sell those also and give you support on those also. So it makes no sense not to just call up there and get your radio. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to mention, one of the reasons why Jerry is supporting the TYT is because it's the same software vendor that's writing the internal software and the programming software for both his radio
Yes.
and theirs.
The TYTs, we have a club member, Glenn. What's Glenn's call sign?
QIQ?
Yes. Glenn had worked for a company that did a lot of business in China. They were making power supplies or something like that, and had been over there. And he had told me that there's basically a neighborhood in China, something the size of Nassau County, where all of these manufacturers are. Wuxing, Baofeng, TYT, they're all there. And so the reason the radios all look alike is they all go to lunch together. It's as if you took the whole radio industry and went chunk, it's right there. So there is a lot of similarities for these. Okay, let's talk about operating. Typical conversation. Now, what's interesting here is W2XA monitoring Southeast Regional. Usually at Limarc, we just throw our call sign out. Sometimes we throw out mobile. Sometimes, to be annoying, I'll throw out where I am. But that's just, by our standards, we just need to know what your call sign is. We know you want to talk, okay. Remember we said that if you're scanning, your radio is whipping through all these talk groups, and I hear some guy say, this is W2XAB. Who, where, how, how do I get back to you? The reason he's saying he's monitoring Southeast Regional is so that I can then take my radio, dial the Southeast Regional talk group, and have a chance to get back to him. So, using this logic, if I were to say this is K2YO monitoring Limarc local. Now, if your radio is scanning, you know that K2YO is on Limarc local, not on North America, not on Tri-State Regional, not on Northeast Regional, etc. And so it's a good idea if you're calling in the blind, do put your call sign, obviously, but put where you are calling on so that people have some chance to be able to get back to you. What else is there? Spend most of your time listening, not talking. I disagree with that. We as a club, we've got 400 members. Nobody ever talks. I love it. Every now and then, if you guys have heard me on the radio, you'll hear me talking to somebody and we'll come up with some obscure question like, what's the population of Rhode Island? And you'll hear me go, hey, anybody on frequency, what's the population of Rhode Island? And somebody will come in and go, oh, that's 4.2 million people. And so I know there are people out there listening. So ignore that. That's the people that want their network seen but not heard. Couple of things, don't over-ID. The person knows who you are because they've got your ID. They can look you up if they really cared. You have to ID once every 10 minutes. Don't ID every, if I'm talking to Neil, don't say, NDG, this is K2YO, every time. He then passes it back to me and I say K2YO to NDG. Neil, how you doing? And don't be doing that. Just ID every 10 minutes. ID whenever they ID. One of the downsides is you will not hear the repeater ID. The repeater IDs, but it's not in your talk group. And so you won't hear it in your radio, so you don't get that reminder of the repeater ID'd, I better ID.
Hey, Bernie?
Yes.
Mac is not in any talk group, it's actually analog.
Yes. Who said, hey,
Well,
Bernie?
the requirement is that you ID every 10 minutes. If the radio is IDing automatically, doesn't that count? Then you
No, the repeater is IDing. My radio is not IDing, the repeater is IDing.
No, what he's saying is that when I key my
Oh.
radio on your end, it shows
It
my
shows
call
who it
sign.
is.
It's showing my ID number on your
But
screen.
it's not sending your call sign, it's sending a number which does not mean anything
Yeah.
except to the radio.
The FCC does not consider that to be a valid ID.
Okay.
This last line, promote DMR to your friends. I just want to make a comment that my experience of dealing with this stuff has been wonderful. When we bought the repeater that we got, that we have today, Lou and I scoped it out, we picked it out, we got it, we brought it back. We bummed some power off of our friends at Gisbark, we powered it up. It wasn't right. Now we're thinking, okay, we just paid $2,500 in cash, what do? We go back to the guy, we say, it's not right. He goes, well, here, take this one and see if it's right. So now I have 2 of his repeaters. I'm six aisles away. checking those two out. And the degree of trust in the DMR world is substantial. The degree of helpfulness is substantial. I have not met anyone in the DMR world that you can't say, hey, how does this work? And they'll tell you, could you help us out with this? We're trying to get a repeater up, but we don't have a flugel valve. Could you get us one? Absolutely. And so the DMR world is extremely helpful. When you get into any of the email groups for them, they're extremely helpful. Put your problem out there and say, hey, I'm new to this. I'm having trouble programming this. And that extends also into the world inside of Limarc. A number of people have been extremely helpful in sharing code plugs, getting somebody a modified code plug, or here, just give me your radio and we'll get it programmed for you. A couple of things extremely useful. This amateur radio guide to DMR is about 40 pages, maybe a little bit longer. Absolutely, it's a must read. It'll probably be a repeat of a lot of what I've talked about, but they're all important subjects. Other resources, dmrmark.net and the guide.turbo.org. So those are all good useful sites. I'll stall a little bit because the pens are in action. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to mention that the series of messages you sent out over the past bunch of months, I've saved all of them, and that makes a wonderful white paper for DMR for the club.
Thank you.
Plug yourself.
Thank you. I didn't want to bring it up because it would be immodest. And I'm terribly immodest to start with. Yeah. Yeah. Do you take cash or can I just give you? One of the things that most of you have realized is that I have either intentionally or unintentionally become the Pied Piper of DMR in Limarc. Largely that was a byproduct of we went to Dayton, we spent a couple $1,000s on equipment, and then one night we're sitting around going, I wonder if anybody will ever use this. And that became the need for, number one, we got to get people to use it, and there is a curve, there is a learning curve here. It's steep, and it's important, and it's something that I would encourage every ham to ride up that learning curve, if only because it's there. That digital radio is not going to go away. When we are all the old timers one day, there's probably only going to be digital. That we'll be talking, I remember when repeaters were analog, and you could just talk and listen to it with a couple of razor blades. And that's probably where it's going to be, that our kids, our grandkids are only going to know digital radio. Everybody got this? Yes, sir.
At one point, we actually brought up at last board meeting, and we ought to mention it here, is basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you have two CS Connect systems, brands, the 700, 750, and the TYT. If Limarc, some group here, we could make simple starter plugs that everybody was on the same page with, and you could go and take that, or have it emailed to you, and say, oh great, you bought a CS 700, here's the starter plug, and everybody's on that same frequency list. At least you're in the right racetrack.
I think we decided at the board meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, that Bernie, you were gonna hand over what you have so far as contacts are concerned. Jill was gonna input them and then turn it over to you guys to convert over to the CS 700. Because we don't have a CS 700, we have a TYT.
I'll agree with that because it's not a lot of effort on my part. There are really, and Dave said there's 3 radios, there's really 2 radios. That everybody sitting in this room really has 2 radios to consider. It's the TYT, a MD380, and the Connexus 750, because you can't buy 700s anymore.
People do have a 700.
I understand, but anybody that's got a 700 has been around for a while and aren't the people that need the help.
And the software is similar enough that you can copy and paste between them.
No. 750 and a 380 are completely different.
No, you can't use the same code plugs, but you can have both programs open at the same
concept,
time.
yes, the concepts are similar. There is currently a 380 plug in the Yahoo group, and I'll get to that in a minute. I don't know if there's a 750 plug, but we can definitely get one together. I wrote some software that goes off to the master database, grabs all the IDs that match club members. Jerry, wherever Jerry is, Jerry gives me a list of all the club members. I match their call signs to everybody that's registered. Anybody that's seen my emails coming out saying, hey, we've got 110 club members registered. That's just matching the two databases together. So that's what gives us the list that we can then import. Don't want to slow down the Limarc DMR. These are all of the repeaters that are around us. That is us. Now, right now we are part of the Bronx Turbo Group. So as good citizens of the Bronx Turbo Group, we can't be touting our flag too much, but this is Limarc here. And nicely enough that they like us enough that our local is actually on their machines also. On two of their other machines, but a lot of these you're not going to get to, but the local ones, the nearby ones, New Rochelle, Brooklyn you'll get into, White Plains isn't far away. So we have coverage through our friends in a lot of space. This is back to I need that grant that Seal is working on for me for 150 grand. We'll blanket Long Island with repeaters. Until then, we have friends that you can get in through. DMR repeaters are considered like most other repeaters. You're welcome to use them. If you're not, somebody will come in and say, you know, we would rather you not use your repeater. But if you're passing through town, my wife and I love New Mexico. I get on a repeater in Santa Fe, and usually they'll ask. Somebody will come up and say, hey, where'd the Tucson come from? They're just more curious how somebody got on their repeater from there. And they're like, oh, yeah, use it all you want, whatever you need. Here's the auto patch numbers, here's the IRLP access, etc. So these are all the machines that you can get on. Now let's start talking about what you can do on those machines. Here we have time slot 1 talk groups. We're going to talk about what's push to talk in a minute, but these are the time slot 1 talk groups. These are all the talk groups, and these are the talk group numbers and obviously what they are. And so this is what you're programming into your radio for when you want to talk to the people in the outside world. All I have to do, if I want to talk to California, I'm probably going to pick, I'll probably have to go U.S. English. I could go worldwide and try, but if I go U.S. English, call and say, hey, is anybody in the 6th world alive today? Please come back. And so you can pick your range, what you want to do. There's the Latin America I spoke to you about, that if you speak Spanish and want to talk to somebody down south, that's a real good group to talk. If you're like me and your Spanish is terrible, do not try to use that, because you'll probably get run over. You'll meet some nice guys that'll try to help you out, but at some point in Spanish they're going to say, didn't you read the talk group name? Okay, push to talk. We have a unique situation here in the Northeast in that we are in a very dense environment. I would venture to say that we have more hams per square mile than anywhere else in the rest of the country. California has more hams per capita, but we're packed in so tight here on top of each other that we probably have more in the square mile area. These groups are set to be pushed to talk on your radio. Right now it's a policy decision made by the Bronx Turbo Group. The idea is that if I leave my radio on all day, I'm not going to be popping up with every time one of these talk groups goes off. That's their choice. Ken has been talking with Bernie Prime about certain talk groups that they'd like to maybe leave open so that you could scan them, you could just leave them on your desk listening to them all day. But right now, if you want to talk on these, they're called push to talk groups. And what that means is I dial up the group on my radio, I kerchunk the machine. Yes, I know. You're not supposed to kerchunk the machine. In the DMR world, that's okay, because really kerchunking the machine is just sending a data packet to the machine and the data packet back saying, yeah, I can hear you. So I'm telling the machine, hey, I want talk group 13. I want to be able to hear talk group 13. The repeater says, okay, this radio wants to hear 13. I will broadcast 13 to you. And so that I will then hear 13 on my radio. That's what's called a push-to-talk group. We'll get into that in a minute when we start talking about TAC channels. Time slot 1 continued, TAC 310, TAC 311. Let's say that I make a contact with somebody in California and we start talking about how great the Dodgers are and how bad the Mets suck. We don't want to be keying every repeater in North America to have that conversation. So as soon as we realize that we're going to have this conversation, I can say, hey, let's QSY to TAC 310. Okay, we both give our call sign to get off of that combination of frequency, talk group, etc. I then jump over to TAC 310. 310 is the push-to-talk group, which means I have to chunk it to let it know I want to hear it. The guy in California goes to 310, he chunks it also, and now we are talking on 310. 310 is not generally broadcast to everybody. It's a point-to-point connection between their repeater and our repeater at that point. Now, let's say that John struck up a conversation with some guy in Seattle, and they want to go to TAC 310. Well, when they get there, I'm with the guy from LA talking about baseball. John goes, whoops, sorry guys, we'll QSY to 311. And you'll just move on. There will be more TAC channels in the future. Right now, these are the only two that exist, but I can tell you that as soon as those run out, there's a 312, a 313, etc. We have plenty of numbers in this case. Both of those TAC channels are push-to-talk. If you want to use them, you have to chunk them first to be able to get them active. Parrot. Parrot is just what it sounds like. Hi, this is Bernie K2YO. How do I sound? On key, my radio says, hi, this is Bernie. So it's a way that you can get the audio that you have parroted back to you. Audio Test NorCal, there's a website that goes with that. I've not used this feature, so I don't have all the details on it, but the idea is that if you Google Audio Test NorCal, you'll find out there's a website you can go to so that you send a test transmission and it will say what is your sound pressure level on the network effectively.
It's got an audio meter. It's bends between green and red. You want your stuff to be in the green and red.
It's basically
And it's delayed a lot. You have to wait.
It's basically a way to check your deviation in the digital world. While we don't have deviation in the literal sense, deviation now is, are the numbers big enough for you to be loud enough when you get to the far end? Time slot 2. Hey, look at this, Limarc Local 3788. That's us. See our huge array of channels? Yes. We have one right now we're looking at. What are others that would be useful? We don't quite know yet. We're accepting input, for what might be useful concepts. When we start talking about public safety, there's all kinds of ideas. For Limarc, we don't quite know yet. The idea is, though, that 3788 is where you go if you want to talk to somebody from Limarc on DMR.
If you go to 3788, you're probably not going to get someone from Limarc. It's 7388.
Yeah, good point. Good point. 7388. It's getting late. Okay, Limarc Assistance. Limarc has an email group. Some people call it a reflector. Neil and I have no idea why, because that word doesn't exist in the email world. But we have an email list. limarcinc@yahoogroups.com. If you're confused about how to get there, go to the website and look up the email reflector, and it'll tell you how to get there. Do not use this group. This group was stolen from the group and is not part of Limarc anymore. So if you go to Limarc@Yahoo Groups and complain that you never hear anything from me, you're in the wrong group. Now, if you do go to this group, you can then go back to the May, June, July timeframe and get the messages that my shill in the back had promoted to you. They're all in the archives. And basically they were stream of consciousness thoughts, 2 or 3 paragraphs of different concepts in DMR. Also, there are code plugs in the file section. JYSK has put a couple of TYT code plugs in there. I believe there are also some ConnectSys ones in there. This is our meeting place online, is the Limarc email group. Okay? Any questions?
I have a correction.
Yes, sir.
You were talking about the PTT. It doesn't wake up your radio. It wakes up the repeater.
Yes.
No, actually, wait, that's the thing.
Well, he was saying that your radio will wake up. It doesn't wake up your radio.
Yes.
It wakes up the repeater. So if you have your radio on worldwide and he has his on radio and nobody wakes up that repeater,
You won't hear
he's
it.
giving a conversation
Correct.
that's going on in South Dakota.
Correct.
But if you turn around and key it up,
Then suddenly,
everybody's
yes.
radios all of a sudden going to start talking.
Yes. The whole point of the push to talk is it keeps the system quiet all the way up to the C bridge. As soon as I go kerchunk on a talk group, my repeater is now active on that, my C bridge is now active on that. And so to some degree you could say that it's waking up other repeaters on that C bridge. But fundamentally think of it as, I know out west we had some repeaters like that you had to kerchunk them to get the repeater to wake up. This goes back into the late 80s, early 90s kind of stuff.
Ultimately,
Yes.
the reason why we have to push the talk is just for this reason. okay, you got 2 time slots. Now, you have many different groups on time slot 1. If you wake up the repeater and you allow the audio from each one of those time slots to occur, and you want to use, say, TG444, you're never going to be able to get in there because it's being busy. Okay, and the whole point is in a place like the metropolitan area, you don't want that stuff happening.
What Eric is saying is that you have to remember that all of those talk groups, there were 8 or 10 of them, all could have audio, and they're all targeting talk group 1. And so if all those are live, they're all going to be intermixed. And every time you try to key up on a talk group, or I'm sorry, on time slot 1, the odds are you're not going to be able to jump into the conversation. And so because the network's getting denser, they're moving towards shutting those down unless you need them. So that effectively you pick the things that you want to hear at that moment. When you're done, they then time out. Yes, sir.
Question, how long is the timeout?
5 minutes.
The question was, how long is the timeout? The push-to-talk timeout is 5 minutes. So if you're listening to, in fact, there's a TechNet on DMR, and it's specifically about DMR issues. If you're listening to that, and at the end of 5 minutes it stops, the odds are it didn't just go away, just kerchunk again, and you'll reset back on again. Now, let's say that we were on a TAC channel. I'm talking to my buddy in LA about baseball. We're keying our radios every 30 seconds or a minute or whatever. So when you're talking on a push-to-talk channel, it never goes away. When you are listening, they will go away. Yes, sir?
On time slot 2, the Limarc local, that's not push to talk?
That is not push-to-talk.
Which means,
Means that if your radio is turned on and you subscribe to that talk group, if I talk on it, you hear it. It's the closest that we have to our current analog methodology. And that's why they separate those two, is that on time slot 2, we can do anything we want. We can talk all day, but it doesn't impact the other 1,600 users, or 1,600 machines out there. Yes, John?
If I understand also, if the repeater is not woken up, your radio will show signal strength coming out of the repeater.
If the repeater's transmitting, it'll show up. You may not be tuned to a talk group that happens to be talking, but as long as the repeater's transmitting, the signal strength indicator and the green light, if you happen to have one of these, will light up.
Will light up, but you may not hear anything.
You won't hear anything if you're not tuned to the right talk group to listen to it.
John brought up an interesting point that your radio has indicators for when it's busy. That means that the talk group that you're listening to is busy. It may not be busy for stuff that you said you told the radio you wanted to hear. And so when the IDer goes by, the time slot's busy because the IDer is IDing, but it's not making sound out of my radio. One of the interesting concepts of DMR is that your radio only makes sound when you told it you wanted to hear it. Where in the analog world, we don't really have the ability to pick and choose the conversations that are on the frequency. We're either on the frequency or we're not. Here, we're on the frequency and we can pick and choose which types of conversations we do want to hear or don't want to hear.
you could almost make a parallel to the CTCSS tones.
Yes.
Because if you're tuned to 136.5 and someone else is using 14.8, you're not going to hear that.
Exactly. It is exactly like that. That if I have my radio to listen to 7388 only, and somebody is using 7389, say for a special event, I'll see that it's busy. I'll have trouble getting in, but I won't hear any of what's going by on the other talk group.
There's one.
You can have multiple talk groups on a single frequency, so picking a talk group is sort of the analog to picking a frequency on an analog.
It's not actually. What you really got to do is you got to think about it as a post office group. If you know anything about internet, think about it as an IP address, because essentially what you're doing is you're transmitting IP data.
Well, this.
And associated, for example, when you use a browser and you bring up the media player, you're going to a specific port number to get that stream that's coming in. You're doing the same thing here. You're going to a different port number to get that particular data. It's all the same frequency, but we're sending lots of different streams on that one same frequency.
So ultimately, they could start getting in each other's way.
They should
Yes.
get each other.
Slow down, guys. I've got to tell our television audience about this. What they were discussing is the fact that in analog radio, you change frequencies to get a different conversation. In DMR, you change talk groups to get a different conversation. Now, we said that there's one RF frequency, there are 2 talk groups on that frequency. If my talk group is occupied with somebody that's long-winded, nobody else is talking on it. So I can't bounce over to the other talk group and use it. That if
Correct, you should have said time slot.
I'm sorry. It's getting late and I'm slurring words now. There are 2 time slots in my radio. If somebody is on time slot 1 and they're long-winded, I can't do what I want to do on time 1 if it's different than what they're doing. So it is still a limited resource. We can't go too hog wild with the talk groups because we can't have 2 different talk groups talking at the same time on the same time slot.
The only other thing you didn't touch was the same thing like Z-Star, is that Dave can put his radio to sleep and I can wake it up.
We can do that too.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
You didn't touch on that.
Understand. I wanted to get us out before midnight.
Because if you're on time slot 1, it goes to every repeater every.
I highly recommend that document that I said to read, get that and read it. It goes into a lot more detail than I had time to go into tonight. There's a lot of cool features, a lot of stuff that we scratch our head and go, what would we do with that? Because they were designed for a particular market, maybe for the fire department market. Maybe some of the radios actually have the ability, the Motorola radios, you can actually key the mic remotely. Why would I want to be able to key John's radio mic? Well, if the last thing I heard from John is help, I'm falling, then I want to be able to turn his radio on and hear him going, I can't reach my radio, I'm stuck. And so those are public safety, those are construction type tools. So there's a lot of those kind of things built into these radios that we as hams just don't have an understanding of what to do with yet. That document does cover in exhaustion all of those things. Okay, anything else? We'll be around all week. The group is here full-time, the email group, and we've got a tremendous amount of DMR knowledge in the club. I'm not by any means the expert here. The 4 horsemen of DMR are sitting over there. But there are a lot of people here that are on it. I encourage you to get involved, experiment with it, and see how it goes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.